All right. So, we'll hear with the film man. How are we doing? We're doing good. We're doing good. All right. So, everybody, a warm welcome to you all. Net zero is not enough. Technologies for greenhouse gas removal is what we have titled this event. And I'm so pleased to spend this hour with you and some of the leading experts within this field. My name is Paal Frisvold. I work for the SINTEF Foundation. SINTEF, one of the leading research institutes of Northern Europe, more than 2,300 dedicated researchers in applied research. And microphone. All right, so this is a totally different thing. That was just for me to calm down my voice. Right. So very welcome to you all. My introduction was a bit altered by the strong message of Antonio Guterres yesterday when he said that we are on a highway to climate hell. I mean, who could beat that? So what do? We would like to discuss today some of the probably key technologies, enabling technologies that we need to actually change the course and reduce that accelerator and assure that we create this climate pact instead of climate highway to hell. What I'm going to do is to show you a movie, to start with a little film, and then I'd like to invite my colleague, Vice President Sustainability of SINTEF, Nils Røkke, to give a brief introduction about what we are trying to achieve in this endeavor. So let's hope this works and that there's a volume.
The climate crisis represents a fundamental challenge for the world society. The clock is ticking, and we are already late. If we're going to meet the goal of the Paris Agreement, cutting emissions won't be enough on its own. We need to start implementing what we call climate-positive solutions, where we actively remove greenhouse gases from the atmosphere. That's why we've established the SINTEF Global Climate Fund, to invest in the most promising climate-positive research projects. With this fund, we can delve deeper into seaweed's extreme carbon capture efficiency. We can explore the possibility of removing not just CO2, but also other even more potent greenhouse gases. And look at energy-efficient ways to remove CO2 directly from the oceans. These projects are critical for the common good, but without substantial support for research and innovation, we risk falling seriously short. We have a responsibility to safeguard the planet for future generations. Our atmosphere is taken for granted, and we continue to emit and stock greenhouse gases in the atmosphere and in the oceans. Now is the time to take it back out again. We are experiencing a tragedy of the commons, and we need to take the first steps towards responsibility. Because if not now, then when? It's time to take action and start contributing for the climate and for our future.
Great, thank you. So this was a brief video introduction, and the fantastic thing about organizing events at COP is that you're not really always sure who's here and who's not here. But we are delighted to see that in the audience now, it's actually the Norwegian Minister of Climate and Environment, Espen Barth Eide. So while you're here, I thought I would immediately invite you up to the scene and take advantage of your presence. And just while you come up to the scene, just say, you know, you also heard Antonio Guterres yesterday talk about the highway to climate hell, and in this context, we wanted to take a look at how we can contribute to reaching the 1.5 degrees by actually developing technologies that can allow us to remove CO2 from the atmosphere. And indeed, the ocean. You mentioned in your former event here that the ocean captures or absorbs 80% of CO2, which is phenomenal. So it just goes to show that there is a huge need for developing new technologies. So Espen, Barth, Eide, so pleased to see you. I will hand you my microphone. I have been told by the engineer that we should just stick it to our chin and talk. So Espen, Barth, you have the floor.
Okay, thank you, Paul. Good to be here again. It's a good segue because in the last panel in this Bellona Pavilion, which I tend to attend 3 times a day, I think, we had exactly this focus on oceans. And yes, the ocean has done us the service of capturing most of what we emitted, but at a very high price. I'm not going to repeat that, but it's of course it's a service, but it came with a very high price: acidification, heating, oxygen loss, habitat loss. So the ocean is in dire straits, and we can't leave it to the ocean. We have to be better at it ourselves. The best thing we can do, of course, is to reduce emissions in the first place and try to develop all kind of processes in industry and transport and housing and agriculture that actually does not, you know, with much lower emissions. But we have to admit that we will not get to 1.0 if we don't also think about carbon capture and storage and actually extracting CO2 from the atmosphere. I think it's a very important, whenever we say that, we have to start by saying that we cannot base success in the climate work on pie in the sky and a kind of future technologies that don't exist. But those technologies that are being developed will still be important. So both is true. You know, we need to cut emissions where we can, but we also need, as you do, as Benola has been doing, as SINTEF is a world leader, Forskningsrådet, the Norwegian Research Council, deeply into this, and our international partners, that we're trying really now to develop both CCS facilities, but also the connection to carbon and CCS. I visited Eramet in Sauda, and that's a traditional industry plant which emits, I think, 270,000 tons. They are planning to go under zero to net positive by a combination of bio and CCS, and which means the more, what is it, Maria, mangan they produce? Yeah. The more mangan they produce, the less CO2 will stay in the atmosphere. So you're actually earning money on removing carbon. So this is an extremely interesting work stream. Also direct air capture. Again, not as an excuse for not doing other things, but we probably need all kinds of instruments. And so I very much also think that we should follow deeper into how this can be developed. Right now it's possible but costly. The thing, of course, is to get it into a meaningful price and then see what kind of technology is the best way of doing it. And then, as I always do, I also want to build a bridge between what we do here with science and technology to the nature stuff. Okay, in a month we'll go to COP15. The Biodiversity COP, and I have promised myself in every intervention to say we need to build bridges between the climate COPs and the nature COPs. So when we're here, we think about nature, and when we come to Montreal, we remember climate, and that these two are more deeply interconnected. But technology is necessary, and research is necessary, and really to scale up technologies that are embryonic today will be important, and I'm very happy that we have leading environments in our country, and that they work with good international partners in trying to actually provide for a possible scale up in the hopefully near future, because we really need to invest in all different fronts, and we need to empower knowledge. Fakta skal ha makta, as we say back home. And that means that we don't only need the knowledge, but we need to build solid bridges between the knowledge production and the policy development. And since we are at the Bologna Pavilion, I want to say something to those who may not heard it before. We very much value your work, Bologna, because a lot of people use their time reminding us of what we should not do, which is in many cases correct. And there's a lot of things we should stop doing. But in order to stop doing something, you need to do something else. So what I think, and Fredrik personally and Bologna has been, you're really, I mean, we are more or less the same age, and the young Fredrik Hauge was climbing up, factories and putting up banners and stopping things. Don't do this. But the not older, but second youth Fredrik is now pushing us to move faster to the future, accelerate the transition into the 21st century. Let's leave the 20th century behind, and that is something I think is really, really good. And Nils Røkke, who is one of the world's leading experts on all of this, is here. That's good to see. The National Research Council, Mari, is here again. And I think you very much now are trying to orient as much as you can of the resources that you have, even if they're not as many as we thought they were, right? Into it, because it's not the quantity, it's the quality. And to try to take them into, assisting that grand transition that will affect every aspect of our life. If you haven't realized yet, this is what we're talking about here is going to affect everything. Show me a sector that you think will not be affected, and I'll tell you you're wrong. No, I don't think you will, but I know others who think so. So, looking forward to learning from this, and I've just wanted to be here to say I think this is really important work, and I'm very happy that those of you who work on it on a daily basis are committed to this grand change. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much indeed, Minister for Climate and Environment of Norway, Espen Barth Eide. Now I'd like to invite Nils Røkke to take the floor, and I will put on his presentation and give you the microphone.
Okay, well, we can just keep it there, I guess. But I think I'll do this on freehand, so to speak, because very important impetus coming here and momentum behind this. So why did we think about this global climate fund? Well, basically because we see that the maths doesn't add up. There is a gap. And there will be a gap because of the historical emissions, and we need to do something. And what we also saw is that there is not enough support for these kind of solutions which can remove carbon from the atmosphere. And if you look at all the models, if you look to the IEA, if you look to the UN reports, you see there's a residual which needs to be taken out of the atmosphere. And while we're talking about this as if it is available, as if it's something which we could just use, I mean, that works well in models, but it doesn't work if you don't have it in the field and that you can actually deploy these kind of solutions. And why has this been so late? Well, obviously, because there has been no business model for this. I mean, Minister Barth Eide talked about CCS, which also has struggled with the business model. The only good thing CCS do is really to take CO2 out of the chimney and not emit it into the atmosphere. It doesn't add more electricity. It adds to the common good, but that's not been built into the business models. And for removing carbon from the atmosphere, well, it's even worse, because, I mean, how do you find a business model for them which is only serving the common good? And it does not really look into what kind of industries we're looking at. It's the whole sector. And that was why the idea emerged to actually establish a initiative from SINTEF to look at how can we remove greenhouse gases from the atmosphere, starting out with the own investment from SINTEF of about $2.1 million into that activity, and coming up with ideas which can remove greenhouse gases from the atmosphere in novel ways. I mean, there was discussed here, was talked about direct air capture. Yes, that's a very important technology, I think. One which I thought was extremely silly, actually. If you look 15 years back, this is the last thing you should do. But unfortunately, we are there now, where we need to do the last thing we should do, and we need to deploy that fast. And this gap, I mean, there is different figures out there. 2 gigatons per year in 2050. Could be 4 gigatons per year. I mean, the way we are heading now, we're really heading into uncharted water when it comes to global warming. But what is sure is that we need to have solutions for this. So we need to scale these technologies, which are still embryonic. I mean, people are talking about Climeworks, and the people behind Climeworks, which we know from long time ago, are actually going to visit ETH in Zurich next week to discuss with these people. And some new solutions. They're still in the tens of thousands of tons, you know, not at the gigaton. So we need to scale up really. I've seen on the business model, I've seen that EU has changed this with the voluntary, from the voluntary market, but look into the sustainable carbon cycles. And I think this is going to be so important when EU says 5 million tons per year by 2030. Well, it's a start. We should have been already at the 100 million tons or something. But at the same time, it's extremely important to reduce emissions. And that's why we always, when we're talking about these technologies, we're talking about additionality. This comes in addition to what you should do otherwise. So then I can talk about some of the technologies. You know, if you got, yeah, I think that was technology number 3 or 4. I mean, right. No. The one which shows all 4 of them, right? Okay, fine. So in SINTEF, we're starting off with this work. We have finance, which is backing this with a local bank. And this is showing 4 of the solutions. I can go into detail of them after you look. Just sorry about that. Let's look at the first one. The bio-oxygen. So what are we doing? Well, we think in the future, and very near future, we are producing hydrogen from renewable energy, and thus, with electricity, you get 8 times as much oxygen as you get hydrogen from water. And that oxygen would be available to burn biomass. And with biomass, you burn that with oxy-combustion, and you can store that into bio-CCS, so I guess we'll hear more about that later on. But with the pyrolysis of the biomass residues, you can also bury the biochar in soil. And with that, you will also get energy out of this process. So this is one of the projects we are pursuing. The next. We got 10 projects running at present. This one is really bad figure I see now, but this is looking at the metal industry, which is talking about Eramet. And one of the problems with the biochar is that it's too reactive. So you really need to moderate it and to deactivate it. And in this reactor, we take the biocarbon and we take methane from biomethane. You then make deactivated biocarbon, which then can be used in the metallurgical process, and you can capture that CO2 and thus take the CO2 out of the cycle. And you also get hydrogen in that sense, which is climate positive. Next. Yeah, this is seaweed CO2 removal. This is the largest project we're running, where we have a seaweed farm outside the Trondheim in Hitra, where we're looking at how much can you grow of this, what is the growth rate, and what are the losses, and how is these different fragments which are dropped from this, how are they deposited, and how can we then, when we harvest this, make sure that this doesn't come into the cycle again. That is typical research, I would say, to do that. And this shows some of the potential of that. And, well, I guess it won't see too much there. But anyway, if you go to the last one. So when I talk about greenhouse gases, I was made aware that it should be written as CO2 equivalent removal, because we're looking at removal of methane or nitrous oxide in the atmosphere. These are showing you some of the sources of this. And it's a big problem, as we know. If we can take that and then remove through a catalytic process and a reactor design these species, methane and nitrous oxide from the atmosphere, you could do that with a much higher price than you do today with CO2. Say that you have $100 per ton of CO2 removal. If you do that for nitrous oxide, remove 1 ton, you can multiply by 300. So you get 30,000 dollars per ton, which of course means that there is a possibility to market these kind of solutions. I don't know what I've eaten today. So, yeah, I think we'll go to the next, which is the last slide. Yeah, water would be good, but do it afterwards. We have developed a tool to look at what kind of, how does the different scope 1, scope 2, and scope 3 look at the emissions which are caused by various type of activities. Oh, thank you. And next slide shows more scope, which is now going to be a commercial product which follows all the different scopes in terms of emissions when you follow the different value chains. This has caused a lot of interest because we don't just look at the scope 1, 2, and upstream, downstream, but also on scope 3. So the objective from our side was really to figure out what kind of impact does our research have on emissions. How far can we follow that? That was the start of this project, and it's now going to be a spin-out from our activity, which is also linked up to this initiative to remove greenhouse gases. With that, I think my voice is good and I'm finished. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Nils. We've heard that there are a series of technology options out there. Now I would like to invite Fredrik Hauge, the founder of Bellona, to come up, as he has indeed had experience with how to upscale. While Fredrik is coming up, I'd like to make a pre-announcement for Beck, who is our next speaker, because one of the things we want to do here is to look at what are the incentive structures, what are the mechanisms to lift up these technologies, and something spectacular has happened in the United States, and Lee will talk to us about that. Right now, Fredrik, we want to challenge you because when we look around here, when we hear what all you've done, you've sort of been through this, of how to bring up very low technology scale projects to scaled up. How could you help Nils with scaling up all these technologies that he presented?
Thank you, Paul. Mostly by doing it, I think. But I think we should start back to 2007 with the IPCC report coming out then, because after that, Bellona did a big study which we called How to Combat Climate Change. In that report, we said it's basically two things we really have a lack of to fix this problem, and this is some years ago. And that was carbon capture and storage and new ways of producing biomass. As many of you know, we have been very active on carbon capture and storage, which is a very important enabler to be able to go carbon negative in the future. And I think to benchmark what we're doing today, we don't necessarily need to have the solutions that go carbon negative today, but we must put the technologies in that concept. So when we're building infrastructure for carbon capture and storage, this enables us also in the future to be able to go carbon negative. So beside carbon capture and storage, we started then 2 big projects. And what we found that time was that very few of the projects globally worked on biomass production with seawater. And very much when you look into the biomass issue, it's extremely many different business that say, oh, bio is going to be a part of the solution. And we don't have enough biomass to all these solutions. And to be able to produce biomass without conflicting on biodiversity, freshwater, and so on, we developed 2 projects. One is called the Sahara Forest Project, and the other is the Ocean Forest Project. So to start with the last one, we are today the biggest producer of seaweed in Norway, probably in Europe, together with the fish farming company Lerøy. And this has been a project where we test out different ways of how to seed, how to harvest, and how to make products of it. This is not carbon removal yet, because we think that, for example, making fodder of seaweed, we have now tests that shows that when we use this as fodder for cattle, we are really teach the cattle to behave, so they burp 30% less. And that means 30% less methane emissions from the cattle. This is avoided emissions. It's not carbon negative yet. With Sahara Forest Project, we bring seawater into the desert. We do desalination, and we use the brine to evaporate it in the greenhouses to cool them, and the evaporated water supplies the greenhouses with fresh water, and we also get the outer reforestation effect. This is also now going to be possible to do carbon negative in the future, which means that we need then, and Nils talked about pyrolysis, we think that biochar will have a huge effect in the desert instead of normal fertilizer, and we think this is a way to store. And then we have the discussion, what is carbon removal and what is avoided carbon? And I think this is extremely important when we talk about these issues, that there is a difference between this, and we have to be extremely aware on how we talk about this too. We need both, but there is very many projects that's marketed as carbon removal, which is just avoidance. So that is, we are now putting up new criteria, work how this should be for the regulators, and work to make principles for this for the European Commission. I mentioned carbon capture and storage, and I think it's interesting to see that the project with capturing the CO2 from Heidelberg cement in Norway is 50% fossil fuel in that mix, it's 50% bio. Today you don't get credited for the bio, and we work with the Commission to put up how the regulations should be for this. Also with the waste incinerator in Oslo, which will have carbon capture and storage, there is around 50% bio. How is this going to be taken into the account? Since I very easily get bored, we also have started a battery factory, Morrow, and we are now working to see how we can make pyrolysis technology to produce the biochar, to take care of the surge scope, the suppliers of the metals, to use biochar. And then we use the syngas to balance solar. Because we have Heidelberg cement just an hour up drive, we have then the infrastructure to be able to remove the CO2 and store it out in the North Sea. So whatever Bellona does, we try and have done that since 2007-8 to benchmark this into a carbon negative solution. And that's quite a difference to go just zero. Because if you go zero, you may be, and I don't say this is the conclusion, but just to think about, you could cut out all the coal. If you want to go carbon negative, you maybe want to have some coal power plants left, co-fired with biomass, because that enable more biomass with not such a high energy content to be used. I don't say this is the answer, but this is the way we have to be pragmatic when we look at the different solutions. So I'm very happy that SINTEF is now coming up with this fund, We have also some initiative in Bellona Holding, which is the commercial part of the Bellona Foundation that we will launch later next year, which is quite big projects in enabling also carbon removal projects. But so far we have the battery company that we are part owner of that we want to do carbon negative. We grow seaweed because we need new ways of biomass. And I think Sahara Forest project is a project that really could make a difference, enabling us to find carbon negative solutions for the future. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Fredrik. Thank you very much indeed. Now, Fredrik mentioned something really crucial, we believe, for enabling these technologies, this set of technologies to develop, is the regulatory framework. And he mentioned what Bellona Europe had done in Brussels towards the EU institutions in order to get this right. That is obviously a very European approach. So now I'd like to invite Lee Beck from the Clean Air Task Force to join us, because there's been a miracle in the United States. The Inflation Reduction Act actually changed a lot, to the extent that there are numerous trade issues starting to emerge between the EU and the US. Let's leave that aside, but I know that Lee has been very instrumental in working for this specific act. So please come and join us up on the floor. Lee, the floor is yours.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me here today. Also, thank you to our partners at Bellona for hosting this really important event at this pavilion. We're always very grateful. My name is Lee Beck. I'm actually now the Senior Director for Europe at the Clean Air Task Force. Before I stepped into this role, I was the Global Director of our Carbon Capture Program, which actually focuses on carbon management technologies in the US, Europe, and the Middle East. And we have technology and policy experts. And yeah, for those of you who don't know Clean Air Task Force, we're a global climate organization. We focus on overlooked solutions for a zero carbon future. And you're all actually invited to join our Zero Carbon Future Pavilion in the next hall, where we're, for the first time, really focusing on the nexus of energy access, energy security, and climate, and really trying to investigate the hard questions while also zooming into regions like Europe, like Africa, the US. So 2 weeks of programming. Please join us. And I think this conversation is really, really important here, because I think we're here at this implementation COP. We're trying to implement climate solutions. And what we really have to think about, and I think Fredrik, you put it really well, is climate is an infrastructure problem, right? And so while we have, of course, nice climate targets, 2030, 2050, it's also sort of a chronic condition where we have to continuously adapt policy, technology, and plan for the fact that maybe our plans, as we're thinking about them today, might not work out. So, for example, we need to certainly commercialize carbon dioxide removal technologies as soon as possible to have more options available and reduce risk that any of our solutions that we're planning are going to be failing. So this is kind of how we're looking at commercializing all options that we have on the table, while doing so, of course, environmentally responsibly. And I think what's, from our perspective, really important is we need to reduce costs. We need to enable learning by doing. Essentially, we need to do what Germany and Denmark have done for offshore wind and solar for all other technologies. But we also need to invest in infrastructure, in this case, CO2 transport and storage infrastructure. And so if we're thinking about what the United States has done recently, not just with the Inflation Reduction Act, but I think it's really important, the Inflation Reduction Act and the Infrastructure Investments and Jobs Act, which was passed actually before COP26, really form this unprecedented package of $500 billion of climate investments in the United States. It's not a regulatory mechanism as Europe would probably prefer. It's an incentive mechanism, because in the United States, climate is more so a political economy outcome rather than a regulatory outcome. I think that's really important. So, but then what's really interesting about this policy package is that it's an across the value chain policy package to commercialize carbon dioxide removal technologies. So there's investments in pilot scale facilities. There's investments in, there's a prize to lower the cost of carbon dioxide removal facilities. There is investment in demos, $3.5 billion in demos. We're expecting, and I see Steve Kelly right here from 1.5, we're expecting the first megaton scale facility in the United States to break ground as a result. But there's also $5 billion in CO2 transport and storage investments, which could unlock more than $19 billion in this infrastructure that Frederick, again, alluded to that we need to really plan for. And then finally, there's the reform of the 45Q tax credit, which is kind of the shiny object amongst many of these policies, and that is basically an inverted price on carbon. So it's now providing $85 a ton for carbon capture and storage at industrial facilities and power facilities, and it's providing $180 a ton for direct air capture facilities. So this is where we are today. However, I will say that the U.S. is already thinking about what are the next policies, what are some of the fixes we need as we're commercializing these technologies. And earlier in the fall, in September, at the Global Clean Energy Action Forum, or SEM, Clean Energy Ministerial, CATF partnered up with the Department of Energy to actually host a ministerial on this conversation. We had 20 stakeholders, 7 countries, and discuss, okay, if we're thinking about carbon dioxide removal and the next generation policies, what do we actually have to do to make this a reality? And what I found really interesting is that this is really about technology diversification. So right now, we heard it earlier, there's not a single megaton facility at scale. There's, in the direct air capture space, really 3 main technologies. But what we need is really overcome the traditional fault lines of technology versus nature, but also move towards a shifting portfolio of permanence, which is essentially what the IPCC outlines. And for this, we need to constantly adapt policy and constantly invest across the value chain to really ensure that technologies are moving through the innovation pathway. Other pieces that were mentioned is that we need a more straightforward regulatory environment. I mean, it's really important to understand how are we actually going to permit some of these facilities. Of course, additionality, certification. This is where I think the EU is pioneering something really, really important. Access to clean electricity, 24/7 clean electricity. Interestingly, when I asked all the participants to raise their hand whether they would support nuclear in this context, they all raised their hands, which was really, really interesting. And then just really this notion that we're planning for all technologies in the long run. And so what we're hoping, and I know next week there's going to be a big announcement at the Danish Pavilion on kind of key investments from 6 countries and the European Commission, so please stay tuned. I think it's at 10 a.m. on the 17th on next mover investment and policy investments to really have a global approach to carbon dioxide removal and investing in the next technologies. I think I want to stop with one other thought that was for the first time ever mentioned in a ministerial in this MMI setting, and this was really the notion that we need to focus on workforce. We need to really think about what are the kind of talents, what are the kind of experts, workforce that we need to deliver on the energy transition as a whole, but also what are the jobs implications of building a carbon dioxide removal / carbon management industry. The other piece is really thinking about, okay, so we have the US and Europe are sort of first movers, but we also know that a clean US, a clean Europe is not the end game, it's just the beginning. So how can we work with next mover markets on creating conditions to shorten deployment timeframes? That means investing in CO2 storage, investing in scoping sources and sinks, scoping sites, also helping with workforce development. And so we're working on some of these next mover market partnerships because we really want to make sure that we're not just deploying these technologies here, but also helping other countries to deploy them in the long run. Because as we know, there's gigatons of carbon dioxide removal in all the models right now. So I'll stop here. Thank you everyone for joining us, and we're looking forward to this discussion.
Thank you very much indeed, Lee. Thank you very much. So before we talk about some of the industrial examples of what's taking place, I'm really pleased to invite the next speaker to the fore, who is Mari Sundli Tveit, the CEO of Research Council of Norway, because as we know, all the CCS work that we have accomplished in Norway, there is a lot of research behind it. So we look forward to hearing what's the next role of research in this endeavor. Please.
Thank you very much. And let me just start by saying two things. It's been super, super interesting and inspiring to listen to the speakers so far. And the second thing I think I want to say is thank God that Fredrik gets easily bored, because that's that's made very many very interesting things happen. I mean, different kinds of carbon capture, storage, removal. I mean, this has been on the agenda for many years. We've been hearing about it for a long time, but I think for a very long time it was also considered long shot technology. It was birds on the roof. It was far away, and there were very many different technologies that we were talking about, and now we are there. That there's little question, very little question, that CO2 removal is going to be a paramount technology to contribute to the Sustainable Development Goals used by the UN throughout, and we will not reach the 1.5 without it. It's absolutely necessary that we do it. So many of these technologies are not mature. Some of them are, so we need to scale them up and we need to get it going. That's happening. And I think the Longship, we haven't really talked a lot about Longship. Fredrik did it here in this session today. But that is one of the first projects in the world demonstrating the full CCS chain at industrial scale. It's a huge thing, literally. and the budget is huge. And I think it's great that we came to a place where we had the investment decision. It's happening. It's actually out there on the ground now. But we need to never forget that would have never happened if it wasn't for, the passion and the stamina of very many people of making it happen. But also it wouldn't have happened if we didn't have research from basic to very, very applied research for very many years. It just wouldn't have been possible. So that's the exact same situation with all the different technologies that we're now playing with, and that we also need to scale up and implement. And that's where we come in. So we need to make sure in all the mechanisms that we have, and in the way that we manage the resources that we have. And now the minister said, I think that you in the Research Council, that you're doing everything that you can with the money that you have, and we thought it was more. Yes, and I'll tell you that we could have spent more money on this, but we're doing everything that we can with the money that we have within this field to do everything from the iterative process, having the iterative processes going, having all the incremental, all the in-industry processes that we can support, but also let's not forget the basic research. Because I think Beck said it very nicely. You said the overlooked solutions. And that's where I'm the most fearful also from the Research Council's perspective, because if we don't put enough resources into the basic research, we will lose out on we will overlook solutions in our eager also to speed up and accelerate on the solutions that we have. So we have to keep those are two thoughts that we need to keep throughout and always. So we're doing that, and so we still need comprehensive R&D to have new technologies and to spread out and those solutions. I think there's a long way to go still on more cost-effective CO2 capture technologies. I think it's super inspiring to see what SINTEF is doing, the range of projects that you have. So we're looking forward to be involved also in that in the future. Still a lot to do on risk reduction. And also, still, and you were saying it, Nils, that a lot to do on social science research to look at business models, because that's quite tricky in many of these technologies. So all of this and a lot more we need to support and leverage from our side. So I think that we need to have this dialogue going. That's going to be paramount, that we actually keep the dialogue open to make sure that we shape the mechanisms throughout, because this is a context which is changing so quickly. So part of the preparedness is actually the agility of the system, and sometimes we are a huge system, so being agile in that can be a challenge, but we need to do more of that. And how do we do that? Yes, we do that by having very close contact, very close dialogue with the people actually doing it on the ground and everything in between. So I'm looking forward to that. We have lots of different projects and partnerships that I could have mentioned. I think I will mention just a few, because we've been talking about everything going on in the European realm here, within the world's largest research and innovation system, which is Horizon Europe at the moment, and we are involved there in something that's called ACT, and I'm sure you know it, all of you know it, but it's accelerating CCS technologies, and this is so this is just one of the platforms where we are really committed. We have 16 countries and regions that since 2016 has had very fruitful cooperation within this CO2 capture, utilization, storage, and also 3 joint calls for proposals. So this is one of the very important platforms, and we also plan to integrate this as part of the clean energy partnerships, which is also going to be very important, covering the whole energy sector. And this is also a partnership which is open to countries outside of Europe, and I think that's also a very important perspective to keep here. And we are ready to take a leading role there if funds are made available for CDR. And just one last thing to mention, I think, is mission innovation, which is very important, and we're very committed there too. And CDR is a key mission, and the ambition is to achieve a net reduction of 100 million tons of CO2 by 2030. Let's just hope that we will be able to do that. And we, from the Research Council's side, we will do everything that we can also from that perspective. I think what we're hearing, I mean, the time since when we were talking about this as something that was really just in the future and not very tangible until now, it's been very, very short. I think it's extremely inspiring to be out in the field visiting different plants, different industries are actually deploying this at the moment. So let's be optimistic about where we can be in just a couple of years. And when we look back from 2030, we'll say, we made it.
Thank you very much, Mari. Very inspiring intervention. So, ladies and gentlemen, we've been through the conception stage of the ideas. We've been through talking about the visions. We've been talking about the incentives, whether it's in research, regulatory, or indeed fiscal. Now we're going to talk about what's actually happening on the ground today. So it's very, very pleased to introduce Valborg Lundegård, who is the CEO of Aker Carbon Capture, because it used to be something else. Please, you have the floor.
Thank you very much. First of all, let me say thank you to SINTEF. They are our partner on R&D, and we would never have been where we are on commercial projects without the collaboration that we've had for so many years with you. So thank you. However, in Aker, we have 180 years history of commercializing technology and delivering large industrial solutions. So we are impatient. And yes, we will work with new technology. Of course we have to do that. But we have to deliver on where we are today. But because the world cannot wait. We have to take action to fight climate change right now. So that is what we're doing. We've already heard about the Longship project. We are delivering the first carbon capture plant on a cement facility in the world. It will be in operation in 2024, and the CO2 will be safely stored on the Norwegian continental shelf. And then we are delivering carbon capture plant, a smaller one, 1/4 of the size of the Brevik plant, 100,000 ton per year, to waste-to-energy provider in the Netherlands. And here we have reduced the cost since our sophisticated technology center Mongstad with almost 90%. So that is what we have been doing since 2012. We have to get the cost down. But it also shows that you have to make some bold decisions and be willing to deliver those first-of-a-kind projects to learn what we've also heard about here today. But we need more scale. And we are working on some very, very large carbon capture projects in the UK. Here we're talking about large gas power plants with CCS with a capacity of 5 times the Brevik plant, 2 million ton per year. This is dispatchable mode and will provide a stable baseload when the wind is not blowing or the sun is not shining. So that's it. But I have a very exciting story to share with you. We set up a pure play company in 2020. And of course, as a pure play company, you need all sorts of things. You need the IT systems, you know, everything from making your travel receipts to, you know, doing the sophisticated calculations. And of course, Microsoft was selected our partner in a lot of these systems. And we came in a very good dialogue with Microsoft. And we suddenly realized that we had so much more in common than the IT systems for a pure play company, because we were both dedicated to decarbonization. And Microsoft's ambitions are maybe one of the most ambitious in the world, because they really set those targets. They had absolutely no idea how to meet them, but they just wanted to go that route because they saw it was the right thing. So now we have an MOU with Microsoft and with Ørsted in Denmark. And we are looking into decarbonizing Ørsted's bioenergy plants, giving carbon credits. And Microsoft in this, what's their role? Well, of course, they want to buy the carbon credits. But also, we are working on them to have the full digital value chain in place and making sure that we have quality data. Because in the future, making sure that we have control of the CO2 will be as important as making sure that we have control of our money, our accounting system. So this is where we are. We are committed to move forward. I'm really pleased to hear the good news from United States and the IRA, and I think this will accelerate. And we don't have much time. So we use what we have now of technology, but we continue to develop more. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Valborg. Thank you very much indeed. We have some time for questions, just a couple of minutes. If somebody would like to ask our panel a question, please raise a hand or indicate something. If not, I will. Yes, we have our friend Olivier here. Please introduce yourself, Olivier.
Yeah, hi. My name is Oliver Gedden. I'm an IPCC lead author, was actually responsible for coordinating the work on CDR. I have a question more on the regulatory side, maybe to Frederick and Lee both. How do we, in a regulatory way, and I think specifically in the US where you say it's more of a political economy question, secure that we don't put all our bets on removal and kind of secure that emissions reductions is still the, at least until net zero, the priority?
Thank you, Olivier. That's really the elephant in the room in this context. So who would like to start? Lee, would you like to say something?
Yeah, happy to also go up front here. Thank you very much. So, you know, I think what's really important in the US context, in any case, CDR is not a get out of jail free card for energy systems transformation, right? So we have to think about it in this way, but it's one, option that we need among all the other options, which is what we discussed today. And the Inflation Reduction Act actually unlocks more than, together with the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, unlocks $500 billion for clean energy infrastructure. So there are also unprecedented deployment tax credits for renewables, hydrogen hubs funding, more than $20 billion in total for carbon management, so that includes carbon capture and storage, and also consumer incentives. So it's really an unprecedented package. Of course, what the US is missing, where we're looking at Europe, is a comprehensive kind of climate policy that puts a long-term signal for decarbonization. That being said, as we're looking at the modeling, if everything that kind of comes through with the Inflation Reduction Act and Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, it should put the U.S. on a good pathway towards meeting its NDC. But I think, you know, and this is where this idea comes in, that there's, of course, comprehensive climate policy, which has to dictate the long-term pathway, has to show the long-term signals like we have in Europe. But then it's not the same as innovation policy, commercializing technologies, reducing their cost, making sure we're having first movers and having constantly this innovation piece. So I think when we're thinking about climate policy, we have to kind of expand our toolkit and need to make sure that we always understand how these two mechanisms kind of work together in synergy. And of course, in the U.S., particularly Clean Air Task Force has also been working on regulatory mechanisms. So the recent Supreme Court case, EPA versus West Virginia, we actually represented some of our clients in this, and we're hoping to have stronger regulatory mechanisms, particularly for the power sector in the U.S., hopefully very soon. So this is kind of what I can say on this topic, but thank you so much for this question, Oliver.
Thank you very much, Lee. So, listen, friends, we've addressed some of the most difficult issues ahead of us, of how to struggle with removing enough carbon from the atmosphere. SINTEF has, from a very long time, developed some early movers technologies. SINTEF, as Valborg and Espen, Barth, Eide said, were very early with carbon capture and storage, with offshore wind. And now, as Nils presented, there are a set of new technologies that we would like to fund at a very infant stage. This is why we have set up the SINTEF Global Climate Fund that can enable us to gather funding resources and to allocate them to our researchers in order to enable them to continue doing research and upscaling and developing these technologies. So we are very pleased that you could all join us today in going through all the different steps on the value chains of how we succeed with bringing out new technologies. And just assure you that we look forward to working with all of you and definitely to see you soon again. So thank you for joining us today and have a good evening.